The Holy Gospel according to Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' body. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed, for you are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. We've sung our alleluias and proclaimed the good news that Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. The tomb is empty, and our mood is one of festive celebration. But did you notice that in Mark's Gospel there was a quite different mood that first Easter morning? Mark tells us that terror and amazement had come upon the three women as they came to the empty tomb and heard the message of that young man dressed in white. They fled from the tomb, and Mark concludes his gospel story quite abruptly with, "They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid." It's even more of a cliffhanger in the original language, as the final word in Greek is gar, which is translated as for. So literally, he ends, "They were afraid for..." Is this any way to end? The additional shorter and longer endings of Mark that are written later, and you can often find appended to Mark in your gospel, attest to how some were very uncomfortable with Mark's abrupt ending, and thus added their own more definitive conclusions. So what was Mark trying to convey? In Mark's Gospel is the only one there's no appearance of the resurrected one. Mark's unexpected ending invites us to imagine what happened next. At some point, I suppose that the woman's fear turned into courage, and the shock of their experience at the empty tomb really shook them to their core. We're told that they said nothing to anyone that day, but eventually they must have shared what happened to them at the tomb. How could they keep it in? How can we keep it in? Mark, ending with that word "for," says that this whole gospel story is just the beginning. It is for something. It is for us. It is for the reconciliation of our broken world. So how will God's "for" happen to us and through us? On this Easter, as our spirits soar in celebration of the good news, perhaps it might be good for us to let these three women at the tomb guide us into another side of the Easter story. For these two Marys and Salome are in many ways like us. They know that dead means dead, and so they bring some spices to help cover up the stink of decay. They worried unnecessarily about how to move that large stone, which they discovered already moved upon their arrival. And when they entered the tomb, their expectations were completely shattered. There was no body of Jesus, just a young man dressed in white with a message for them to share with the disciples. And in two simple phrases, he sums up the good news of Easter. He is not here. He has been raised. In other words, the world has been turned upside down. Death has not won the day. This earth-shattering revelation is totally unexpected, and the woman's emotions are stretched in two contrasting directions. And in Greek, the words are ekstatis and tromos, from the same roots as come our English words ecstasy and trauma. So these women experience at the empty tomb both a trembling trauma and an ecstatic amazement, all at the very same time. How much have we allowed the shock of an empty tomb to wear off for an event that simply should not be believed? How much have we kept Jesus in the tomb, saying nothing to anyone of the truth that we can hardly believe? Maybe this good news that Jesus is risen will begin like a small vibration in our hearts until it grows into a life-changing, amazing, trembling shockwave, just like those women first experienced that first Easter morning. Or maybe God has been tugging at or nudging our inner being, and Mark's abrupt ending today is just the jolt needed for God to bring us from death to life. I think Mark wants to prod his readers into continuing this story, to let the risen one live in and through us. One strong hint I have for this is how Mark begins his gospel. The very first words, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. I think the whole thing is the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. And with this unexpected ending of the women fleeing in silence from the empty tomb, Mark could be asking us, how will the shock waves of that empty tomb reverberate within us? What new beginnings are on our horizons? How will we carry this story forward? Just the hint of a new beginning can fill us with fear of the unknown. We're very comfortable with the set patterns of our lives, and thus we fear change, even when we recognize that we're not truly living, just circling the tomb. There was once a girl who wished that she could get rid of her fear. She despised how it would suddenly arrive, tightening her chest and holding back her voice. She piled resentment and judgment against it. She tried ignoring it. If only she could find a way to loosen its grip and just fling it away. She wished it away so hard. But then one day, a voice came in with gentle opposition and offered a way of resolution. The voice said, "Have you ever wondered if this fear haunting you could serve more of a purpose than something that you just wish away? Have you ever asked this force living in the space around your heart from where it came?" The girl stopped in quiet reflection, bewildered. Was she really not considered this before? So she decided to put down her resistance and breathe deeply into that tightness clenched around her chest. She breathed into the pressure and heat that her fear had formed around the cavity of her heart, and she softened to it. For the first time in her life, she let her fear speak. She said, "Dear tension in my chest, What do you wish me to hear?" And as she listened, to her amazement, it answered, "I wish to tell you that you are alive. I wish to remind you of the life inside you, longing to live more fully. I hold so tightly to you because I'm a constant reminder that there is good work for you to do in the name of your freedom and joy. The more you lose yourself doing all you must do to bring your soul life, the more I shall loosen my grasp. Know that my being here is my way of loving you. Face me with courage. I'm here to serve your greater good." And as she listened, the grip around her heart loosened and began to fill with open space and light. The women at the tomb are told to go and tell Peter and the other disciples, but they fail to even follow that simple instruction. They tell no one because they were afraid. Silence is their response to the good news. And perhaps no words really can capture the full terror and awe of knowing that Jesus has been raised from the dead. Maybe an awe-filled silence is an acceptable response to the mystery of this life-giving word. Silence honors the depth of both the trauma and the ecstasy of the moment when no words suffice. Maybe in the silence, the woman could hear the voice of their fear speaking to them. In the silence, shock waves of the empty tomb can begin to reverberate in and through us, bringing resurrection and new life. The young man's message that Jesus has been raised is not the only occurrence of raising in Mark's gospel. Many of Jesus' healings use the very same word as people are raised back to health. Simon Peter's mother-in-law was raised and healed, as were a paralyzed man and one with a withered hand. A young girl is awakened and raised from a deadly slumber to new life. A boy threatened with fire and water by a demon is raised into freedom from his torment. Levi rises up to follow Jesus, leaving his tax booth behind. Jesus rises up from sleep in a boat to still the chaos of a storm. And Jesus says that the kingdom of God is like a sown seed, growing as people sleep and arise. Jesus invites his disciples to rise from sleep when his betrayer arrives with those who arrest him. Resurrection is sprinkled throughout Mark's gospel. Resurrection is a healing, restoring, reconciling, transforming power, still so badly needed in many corners of this broken world. Jesus' resurrection says that the death-dealing domination systems of our world can be overcome. Our world can become more equitable, more forgiving, more loving. Our hope in that arc of the moral universe bending towards justice can be resurrected. God's shalom will arise among us and through us. I heard a note of such resurrected hope in the voice of Jonathan Haidt being interviewed this week on the radio about his book, The Anxious Generation. He shared concern for an increased mental health crisis in children due to so much former time for play now being replaced by screen time. And in response to those who ask, isn't this just the way of the future? We can't put the genie back in the bottle. You know, the train has already left the station. He says, if a train has left the station and it's full of children and it's going out on a track, And we know that the bridge is out and it's going to plunge down a gorge and they're all going to die. Should we not try to call it back? He says, I think we should. I intuited another note of resurrection last Sunday as a group of Christians and Jews gathered to share insights from the book of Paragon as it relates to the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. The book centers around two friends, a Palestinian and an Israeli. And one of them declares, this won't be over until we talk. We ended our discussion with a common discernment that this heartfelt time that we've shared together could make a difference even from a vast distance as we send out our good vibes into the world. I came away from that discussion with my hope resurrected. Where do you see traces of the resurrection happening in your life? How might Christ's resurrection be happening in and through you? This day, the one who continues to bring life from death will transform us. All traces of death have been removed from us. We've gone with the women to the empty tomb and heard the news that he's not here. He has been raised. We've been filled with a mysterious mix of ecstasy and fear that can guide us as we listen in times of silence. And as we go forth today, let's not follow the women's lead. Let's tell this story. Let's embrace the risen one living within us. It's a new day, and we are God's Easter people, embracing our fears and ever ready to find out what our resurrection is for.